My name is Jennifer, and I'm 47 years old. 3 years ago, I stopped answering my mother's calls, not because of a single catastrophic lie or a dramatic betrayal, but because I finally understood that I had been drowning for 30 years while everyone around me held my head underwater and called it love. The moment that changed everything wasn't a moment at all, really. It was a Tuesday afternoon in March when my mother called asking me to cover for my brother's custody hearing because he couldn't afford to miss work. And I realized I had spent my entire adult life saying yes to everyone else's emergency, while my own life collected dust in the corners of rooms I barely stayed in long enough to see clearly. I didn't yell, I didn't cry, I just said no, and then I turned my phone to silent. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to the person I was before the silence, the invisible Jennifer, the one who held the whole fragile structure together with bleeding fingers and a smile that never showed the damage. I was born the middle child, not quite golden enough to be the favorite, not quite disruptive enough to be noticed. My older brother Marcus was the charismatic one, the golden child who could charm anyone at a dinner party and show up to nothing without consequence. My younger sister Amy was the rebel, the brilliant disaster who needed constant rescue. And there was me, competent, capable, endlessly available, the default solution to every problem. My parents, divorced by the time I was 12, were each living fragmented lives, my father in a new marriage 2 states away, my mother trying to hold together a house that kept falling apart at the joints. I became the infrastructure of that house without ever being asked, without ever having a choice. At 14, I started managing the mortgage paperwork after my mother had a panic attack at the bank. At 16, I was the one cooking meals because Amy had dropped out of regular attendance at family dinners, and Marcus had decided family dinners were beneath him now that he was in high school. By 18, I was working part-time at the hospital where I'd later become an ICU nurse, and somehow also maintaining a 3.8 GPA while managing the household schedule. Nobody asked me what I wanted. Nobody asked if this was working for me. The architecture of my family's functioning had my name written into every load-bearing wall, and everyone had gotten so comfortable leaning on me that my actual presence became invisible. I was just the thing that made everything work, the utilities, the infrastructure. I remember the day I got my acceptance letter to nursing school with perfect clarity. It was in an envelope with the hospital letterhead's blue logo, University of Washington's program. I was the first person in my family to attend a 4-year university, and I ran downstairs where my mother was on the phone with her sister, whispering about money problems. I got in, I said. I was holding the letter like it was made of glass. Full scholarship, Mom. She looked up, mouthed congratulations, while still holding the phone receiver, and then nodded at me to be quiet because she was discussing something serious. I went upstairs and cried for 2 hours in my room, not from sadness, but from the sheer weight of realizing that even my achievement was just background noise in the crisis management of her life. But here's the thing, I still went. I still did the work. I became the ICU nurse because somehow, after a lifetime of being the person who held everyone else's disaster at arm's length with clinical precision, I had learned to do it professionally. Save people, fix things, keep everything functioning. What I didn't do was stop managing my family. I remember the first emergency call. I was a junior in college, studying for my med-surg exam at 2 in the morning, when Amy called crying because she'd gotten expelled from her community college for attendance issues. My mother couldn't be reached. She was with a boyfriend she was trying to make work. Marcus wasn't answering, so I drove home at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, took off work on Wednesday, and spent Thursday getting Amy enrolled in a different program with better online options. Nobody acknowledged that I'd lost sleep, missed shifts, or put my own education in the background. They just assumed it would be taken care of, because it always was, because I always took care of it. This happened maybe 40 times over the next decade. The kidney stone crisis when I had to drive my mother to the ER at midnight, instead of attending my own graduation party. The intervention I organized for Marcus when his drinking problem started showing up in other people's stories, instead of remaining his secret. The time Amy's landlord started eviction proceedings, and I negotiated with him for 3 hours while working a double shift. The afternoon my mother called saying she'd gotten into a car accident and needed me to handle it, when all she actually needed was someone to tell her it would be okay. I was the okay. I was the person you called when things were falling apart because I had never let anything actually break around me. What I didn't see then, what I couldn't see, was that I was teaching them that my needs didn't matter, that my time was infinite, that love meant endless availability, endless sacrifice, endless yes, without ever asking what the cost was. I moved into my own apartment when I was 24, but I was never really alone. My mother had a key. My sister had a key. My brother would show up with a crisis and 3 friends he'd promised could crash in my spare room. The emergency calls never stopped. The small crises became the texture of my life, not melodramas, just the constant hum of other people's needs running just below the surface of every conversation I had. Every day I tried to build something that was mine. I dated people who eventually left because they realized they weren't actually dating me. They were dating the version of me that showed up on the days when my family didn't need something more important. I had relationships that died slow, quiet deaths, not because I fell out of love, but because I never actually showed up as a whole person. I was always bifurcated, half listening, half present, with the larger part of my attention running calculations about who needed what and how I could provide it. At 32, I met someone, his name was David, who actually asked me what I wanted. We were at a hospital fundraiser and he asked me what my dream was, and I literally didn't know how to answer. I'd been so busy building everyone else's life that I had never asked myself that question. He was patient. He tried for 3 years. But eventually he realized that loving me meant learning to compete with the emergency calls, and he was never going to win that competition. The night he moved out, my mother called twice. I didn't call him back. And I just kept going, kept working, kept being the fix for everyone's emergency while my own life became smaller and smaller. The thing about being the family's infrastructure is that you start to wonder if you'd have been necessary, if they'd ever been forced to figure things out on their own. If I had said no to the first crisis, what would have happened? Would they have learned? Would they have found another solution? Or would they have simply adjusted and survived? I think about this sometimes when I'm charting patient notes at 3 a.m, when I see my mother's contact card pop up on my phone, and I watch it ring into silence. What was I preventing by saying yes all those times? What were they never learning to prevent themselves because I was always there? By 40, I had realized something deeply uncomfortable. I had spent my entire adult life making myself irreplaceable through the simple mechanism of being the only person willing to destroy their own life to keep everyone else's intact. It's a subtle form of control, really. Love wrapped around obligation. Necessity dressed up as devotion. My brother got into financial trouble when he was 43. Not disaster, just the slow consequence of decisions that would have been manageable if he'd been managing them, instead of assuming someone, me, would step in. He called me at work. "Jen, I need help." Those words had been the opening line to hundreds of conversations over the years, but something was different this time. I was tired. I was so tired that I could barely stand up, and I'd just gotten off a 12-hour shift where I'd held the hand of a woman dying of cancer, and I came to work the next day and did it again, and I was just tired. "Have you called Mom?" I asked. "She doesn't have the money." "Then you need to figure it out, Marcus. You're 43 years old." Silence on the line. "Then, so you're not going to help me?" "I'm not," I said. My voice was so calm, so clinical. "I'm going to go sleep, and tomorrow you're going to figure this out." He hung up without saying goodbye. My mother called an hour later. "What happened with your brother? He says you're refusing to help him." "That's correct," I said. "Jennifer, he's family." And that's when something shifted, something fundamental, because I realized that the entire architecture of my role in this family was built on the foundation of an unstated agreement. My brother and sister and mother would need things, and I would provide them, and we would all pretend this was love instead of just convenience. They would need, and I would give, and they would be grateful, except they wouldn't be, because gratitude requires acknowledging a sacrifice, and acknowledging a sacrifice means admitting that I had given up something I valued for something they wanted. It was easier for everyone to just assume I had infinite resources, infinite time, infinite emotional capacity, infinite love that didn't cost anything because I never told them what it was costing me. "He's family," my mother said again, as if that explained everything, as if family obligation superseded my own survival, as if it was my job to make sure everyone else survived even if it meant I didn't. "So am I said, "and I matter too." But I don't think she heard that part. I don't think anyone heard that part. The thing that nobody tells you about stepping back from the role of family fixer is that it doesn't create a vacuum that everyone rushes to fill. What it actually creates is just absence, and absence apparently is easier to ignore than presence. I stopped picking up calls. I stopped being available for emergencies. I stopped showing up for the family dinners that it turned out had been structured entirely around my presence anyway. Nobody actually wanted to be together. They just wanted me to be there making it work. For the first month, my mother called constantly, sometimes 6-7 times a day, then less frequently. By the third month, I was getting maybe 1 call a week. By the 6th month, the calls were only coming when there was an actual crisis that nobody else could solve. And those got fewer too because, and this was the hardest part to witness, people actually do figure things out when they're forced to. My brother got financial counseling. My sister moved back in with my mother for a while instead of assuming I would rescue her. My mother learned to say no to some things, to ask for help differently, to problem solve. Life didn't collapse, it just shifted. But here's the thing that surprised me. I thought I would feel liberated. I thought I would finally be able to build something that was actually mine, and I did eventually. But first I had to feel the weight of realizing that the person I thought I was, the helper, the fixer, the one who made everything work, wasn't actually a person. It was just a role. And when I stepped out of the role, there wasn't really an I left over. There was just absence. It took me months of therapy to understand that I'd outsourced my entire sense of self to my utility. I didn't know who I was when nobody needed me. I didn't know what I wanted when it wasn't defined by solving someone else's problem. I didn't know how to build a life that was oriented toward my own satisfaction instead of toward managing everyone else's. I remember the day, actually, I remember the exact moment when I first ate dinner alone and didn't feel guilty about it. It was salmon. I'd cooked it carefully, set out a plate, sat down with a book. And there was no phone call, no crisis, no invisible person sitting at the table with me making demands I couldn't refuse. Just me and dinner and the strange realization that this was allowed, that I was allowed to just exist, to take up space, to matter. 2 years into the silence, I was sitting in the break room at the hospital, and one of the other nurses, someone I'd worked with for 5 years but never really talked to, asked me if I wanted to go to yoga with her after work. I was about to say no reflexively because that's what I always did, but then I just said yes. We went to yoga. It was terrible. I was inflexible and frustrated, and I quit halfway through. And then we got coffee, and she told me about her sister, who she hadn't talked to in 6 years because of some boundary she'd set that nobody in her family respected. And I realized that I wasn't alone in this, that there were lots of people walking around having learned, painfully and slowly, that loving people sometimes meant letting them figure out how to survive without you. The crisis came in the form of a phone call from an unknown number. It was a hospital. My mother had been in an accident, a car accident, hit by someone running a red light. She was stable but badly injured, multiple fractures, internal bleeding that had been addressed. She was going to recover, but she was going to need physical therapy, care coordination, probably a home health aide for several weeks. I got the call at 8 in the morning. The hospital was 2 hours away. For exactly 30 seconds, I felt the old machinery start up, the calculation of what I would need to do, how I would need to reorganize my life, what I would need to sacrifice. The familiar weight of family obligation settling onto my shoulders like something that belonged there. And then I stopped myself. I didn't call my mother. I called the hospital and asked to speak to the social worker. I gave her my contact information in case there was something the hospital needed to know from a family member, but I also gave her my brother's number and my sister's number, and I told her that my mother had 2 adult children who were fully capable of making decisions about her care. Then I sat with what I'd done and let myself feel it. Guilt, relief, guilt about the relief, shame, and underneath all of it a hard clarity. This wasn't my emergency. This was my mother's emergency, and it was also her problem to solve. Marcus called me an hour later. "Where are you?" he demanded. "Mom's in the hospital, we need you to come." "I can't make medical decisions for her," I said. "She's conscious, she can make decisions, you and Amy can help coordinate, you'll figure it out." "Jennifer, this is serious." "I know it is," I said. "That's why I'm not going, because I need you to learn that you can handle serious things without me." He hung up. My sister texted, "Mom needs you, Jen, please just come help." I didn't respond. The truth was, I wasn't not going to be cruel or to punish them. I was not going because I had finally understood that my presence would make their lives easier in a way that would prevent them from learning something essential, that they were capable, that they could survive, that they didn't actually need me. They'd just been raised to assume I would always be available, and I had confirmed that assumption thousands of times by showing up. I went about my day, I worked, I went home, I sat with the guilt and didn't act on it. By evening, I got a call from the hospital. It was my mother's social worker. "Your sister has taken a leave from work and is staying with your mother. Your brother has arranged for a home health aide to start next week. Your mother is doing well and is asking to speak with you." I talked to my mother for 8 minutes. She was sedated but conscious. She cried a little and told me she loved me. I told her I loved her too, and I meant it. I meant it genuinely, without the weight of obligation attached. I said I was glad she was stable, and that I was confident Marcus and Amy would help her recover. I said I'd check in by phone after the initial crisis passed. Then I hung up and I cried, not for her injury but for the 43 years I'd spent believing that my love had to come attached to my entire life. 3 weeks later, when my mother was stable and home and Amy and Marcus had established a rotating schedule for staying with her, Marcus called me, not to ask for help, just to talk. "We figured it out," he said. His voice had something different in it, something that sounded like adult competence. "Amy's been staying with Mom and I've been handling the logistics and helping with the physical therapy appointments. We hired someone for during the day and we're splitting the cost. Mom's insurance covered some, but," he paused, "Jen, we would have figured this out faster if you'd been here, but we figured it out." "I know," I said. "I think," he said slowly, "I think maybe we needed to figure it out without you." I didn't say anything. The line sat silent between us for a few seconds. "I'm sorry," he said, "for all the times I just called you like you were supposed to fix things, for assuming you'd always be there, for not noticing that this was costing you something." 34 years too late, but he noticed. "I'm sorry too," I said, "for making it seem like it didn't cost me anything." 3 years have passed since my mother's accident. The relationship I have with my family now is different. It's smaller maybe, less central to my life, but it's also more real because it's not predicated on me dissolving myself to keep them intact. My mother is recovered, fully mobile, living her life. She asked me recently if I wanted to come to a dinner, just the 4 of us. I said yes. It was awkward, which I actually appreciated. There was no comfortable rhythm, no unspoken hierarchy of who mattered most. We were just 4 people trying to figure out how to be in a room together without an invisible machinery running in the background. Amy apologized for some specific things she'd done over the years, ways she'd used me, situations she'd created that required my intervention. My mother listened, and then my mother apologized too, in a way that was clumsy but genuine. Marcus brought wine and was awkward in a way that suggested he was trying. It's not healed. I don't know if it ever will be, and I don't think it needs to be. What it is instead is honest. They see me now in a way they didn't before, not as the utility that made their lives work, but as an actual person with a life of her own, with a choice to be present or not. The first few months of not being available, I experienced what I can only describe as a profound identity crisis. Who was I if I wasn't the person solving everyone's problems? The answer turned out to be a woman who liked salmon and yoga, even though she was bad at it. A woman who had a career that was deeply meaningful and who wanted to invest in it fully instead of half giving it, while the other half of her attention managed family crises. A woman who had talents and interests and maybe even dreams, if I ever figured out what they were. I've been dating someone for 8 months now. His name is Thomas. When my mother's crisis happened, he asked me what I needed, and when I said I wasn't going, he didn't try to convince me I was wrong. He just sat with me in my guilt and said, "That sounds like a healthy boundary." I'm still getting used to the idea that healthy boundaries don't make me selfish or cruel, they make me survivable. I think what I want the people reading this to understand is that sometimes love isn't about what you give. Sometimes it's about what you refuse to give away anymore. Sometimes it's about finally seeing that you're not holding someone else up, you're allowing them to bury you, and you're smiling the whole time. I gave my family everything until there was nothing left. They took it without understanding what it was costing me because I'd never told them, and maybe because I'd never told myself. So I stepped back from every role they expected me to fill, and I let them face life without me, and they survived. It's complicated, and it's not resolved, and it's messy and imperfect. But it's real. My name is Jennifer, and I'm 47 years old, and I finally matter to myself as much as I matter to everyone else. That's not something I would have believed possible 3 years ago, but here I am, proof of it. If you're the person holding everyone up, the one who always says yes, the infrastructure that everybody leans on while never questioning what's being asked of you, I need you to know something. You don't owe anyone your destruction. Not your family, not your partner, not your obligations. Love is real, but it shouldn't require you to disappear. And the people who truly love you will eventually understand that when you step back, you're not abandoning them. You're finally being honest that you were never meant to be their foundation. You were meant to be free.